Welcome back, everyone. Let us begin with the second session of the day. I now invite Professor Krishna Iyer to introduce our speaker. Over to you, sir.
Just to quickly confirm, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Just about getting to be afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure for me to invite Indrani Kakre, madam, to talk to us this morning or afternoon. Indrani received a degree in pharmacy from Pune University way back in 1991. And from what I am able to gather, after about 3 or 4 years going around in the industry, at that time probably she had the insight of getting into the field, which was fairly nascent at that time. Way back in maybe about 1995, the field of clinical research was just getting started in India. And at that time, I think she made a very wise decision of getting into this area. And over the many years she has been in this field, she has worked with some of the very top-notch industries when it relates to clinical research. Pfizer, Cognizant, Cypharmex, and so on and so forth. And at the moment, for the last just about a year and a half, she is the Chief Operating Officer or head of the biometrics and data services of Cliantha Research, which is based out of Ahmedabad. And over the many years, unlike many of us who get grounded into what is clinical research as part of our academic coursework, she, I think, has learned almost everything on the job. Because when I think she was doing her BPharm, the field of clinical research was not even there in our syllabus. At the most, we heard terms of bioavailability and bioequivalence and probably nothing more than that. And as of today, she is probably as expert in all facets of what we call as the clinical side of things. That is how to do clinical research, how to do clinical data management, how to handle the statistics associated with clinical data, even to the point that she knows all the things about data standards, their implementation and their regulation and governance, and also the fields of pharmacovigilance. So with all the pleasure, I present to you Indrani Kakde, who's going to be talking to us about clinical trials and the importance of data analysis in this area. Over to you, ma'am. The screen is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you for such a great introduction. And I must admit that I don't know everything in clinical research. Whatever I've gathered through last so many years, I'm happy to share my experience with all of you. But as all of us know, the field is still evolving. There's so much happening, and thanks to COVID, things are changing almost on a daily basis. So I, of course, don't know everything, but I'll make an attempt to share with you what I've learned or what is important for all of us to understand, today, especially when it comes to clinical trials and data analytics. So thank you, and also thank you for giving me this opportunity to present and share my knowledge and experience with the audience that is here today. I will first start with what is clinical trials and the importance of data analytics. If we can move to the next slide, I don't know, I'm not able to control it from my side, so sorry, I'll have to ask somebody to move it.
Yeah. On your team, can you see request control option?
It is disabled right now. If you can enable it for me, I'll be able to ask for it.
You can click on request control and Sagar can give you the control.
Yeah, but I think, yes, I know, but the request control button is disabled right now. I'm not able to click on it. So he will have to enable it and then give it.
Ma'am, I will present, I will change the slides for you.
Okay, I will then have to trouble you, but nevertheless,
no
yeah.
problem.
So, okay, thank you. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So today's agenda is to give an overview on what are clinical trials. I'm sure everybody knows about it, but I thought it's a good platform to start on with a definition and overall landscape where we stand today as an overall landscape in terms of clinical trials, how are they happening, what are the various phases, and so on and so forth. We'll also discuss in brief about the process of clinical trials and who are the various parties or stakeholders that are important in conducting and supporting clinical trials. From there, we'll also move to the market size and the overall landscape in terms of which countries are at the forefront of doing clinical trials, what are the key therapeutic areas where some of the important clinical trials are happening, and also to mention some of the data sources, because we're talking of analytics. It's very important to understand and know where is this data coming from. I mean, analytics is a very broad term. It's a it's more like a format painter that can be applied to an analytics or an analysis done in Excel, but also to very sophisticated AI and ML data related mining and data analytics at a very large data, big data as they call it now. From there on, I'd also like to talk about certain challenges in the clinical trials area and how analytics can help resolve or mitigate those challenges. And last but not the least, how is this done? I mean, all of us know there's a lot of analytics happening, everybody is reading about it, but what are certain methods, methodologies, and certain technology platforms that are most often used by the large companies or by the regulators to do analytics, especially in the area of clinical trial data. So that's the plan for today. Moving on, please, to the next slide. Okay, we'll start with the basic question of why analytics. And as I said, analytics basically is an activity that allows us to search for trends, signals, or any kind of messages in the pool of data. It could be any data. Right now we are limiting it to clinical trials, but it could be financial data, it could be demography data, it could be socio-economic data. So analytics, as I said, is a very broad and loosely coined term in that sense. But here we are looking for any kind of trends, any kind of missing values, any kind of irregularities, signals that the data shows us to be able to derive meaningful insights and meaningful messages, so that certain action can be taken around the messages that we get from the data. And with respect to the clinical trials, obviously what we are looking at is time saving and cost saving through evidence-based decisions. Because based on this data, we get a confidence that this is the way to go forward. There are certain actionables in, for example, to conduct a clinical trial in a specific geography, in a specific therapeutic area. Should the company spend certain dollars on a certain therapeutic area? Is it worth doing a trial, or is the disease so rare that it doesn't make any sense to invest money from a company strategy perspective? So it also helps us, as I said, to drive better decisions, and obviously with reduction in the overall cycle time for getting a new drug to the market. Next one, please. Yeah. Let's talk about the ecosystem of clinical trials, and to do that, we need to speak about or understand the definition and phases of clinical trial, the process and the timelines involved, and who are the key stakeholders who make all of this happen. So moving on to the next slide, please. So as you can read on the slide, clinical trials are studies conducted to collect the data on safety and efficacy of a new drug molecule or a medical device. And this process begins at the preclinical stage with an extensive laboratory research, which can involve years of experiments in humans and animals, rather animals and then in human cells. So this is a pretty standard definition. And moving on from there, there are four phases of clinical trials, sorry. The first phase is the safety assessment, which is a phase which is also called as phase 1 trial. And in phase 1 trial is done in a very small population of subjects or very rarely patients. Typically they are subjects, they are healthy volunteers, and hence they are called subjects and not patients. There are patient-centric phase 1 trials with exceptions like rare diseases or oncology, where the participants are patients and not healthy volunteers as an exception. And in these studies, typically 20 to 200 healthy volunteers are included, and the duration is about 6 to 12 months, again depending on the therapeutic area, the indication, and the complexity of the molecule or the disease area that we're looking at. From there, moving on is the phase 2, which is the focus of phase 2 is essentially the efficacy assessment, and several hundred patients are included in these trials. So somewhere around 200 to 400, 500, or sometimes even 800 to 1,000 patients can be included, again depending on the regulatory approvals and the design of the study. This lasts for about 1 to 3 years. So you can already see how much of time is spent between phase 1 and phase 2. And all of this is again augmented with a lot of documentation that needs to be submitted to the regulators. Then once the drug passes on from a completion of phase 2, it then moves on to a phase 3 where the safety and efficacy assessments are done, but on a larger population pool. So the exposure or the sample size suddenly becomes quite large as compared to what the sponsor did in phase 2. And this then spans over 100 to thousands of patients, and an additional 2 to 5 years of time is spent on the phase 3. And in phase 3, one of the points to mention here is it happens across a large pool of patients, as well as there are certain trials that happen across multiple geographies. So, one of the key trials that's happening today, if you see, is the Solidarity trial, which is happening across multiple, the WHO Solidarity trial that's happening, and WHO is doing it in the field of COVID, trying to find out various treatment modalities, is a typical example of a phase 3 trials spanning across multiple geographies, various patient pools, and a lot of, I believe there are 5 treatment modalities that are currently being tried as a part of Solidarity trial. So that's one of the classic and the most recent examples that I can think of that will resonate with everyone. And if at all the drug does well in phase 3, it is then submitted to the regulators, regulatory bodies, post which the approval is sought from the regulatory bodies, and then it comes to the market. And phase 4 of clinical trials is typically long-term, is done for typically long-term safety and efficacy assessment sometimes. And it's also called as the post-marketing surveillance or real-world trials. So there's a lot of buzz around real-world data, real-world trials, or real-world evidence. And this is where the data comes from. The regulators want to see whether a drug or a molecule or a new medicine works differently when it is introduced in the real world or the real market, because clinical trials are fairly controlled environment, but phase 4 or real world trials allow us to see how these drugs will work in a particular ethnicity, in a particular population, in a particular age group, or even in a particular geography. So that gives us a real feel to how the drug performance will happen in the real world. Yeah, so that's what the real world trials are about. Moving on, we will also talk about process and timeline. So as I said, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and as you say, this example is more around FDA approvals, but it can also go to other regulators like MHRA or DCGI or Anvisa, etc. in Brazil. So this I've already explained, but I wanted to highlight one fact, that total cost of clinical trial market as of date, and this report is dated February 20th, if I'm not mistaken, last year, and was estimated to be 44 billion and is expected to grow to close to about 70 billion by year 2028. So if you look at the pie, I've really not attached it here, but the background data says that oncology is still at the forefront of the clinical trials being conducted segment-wise, then followed by anti-infectives and the other therapeutic areas. It takes about 12 to 15 years of research before the drug is actually released in the real world for marketing purposes. But an average time of 7.5 years is taken for approval. Now again, it's become completely different with COVID coming into the picture. People or the companies are getting very shorter approvals, especially 3, 4, 5 months of an approval cycle, and all of us know that it's mainly on an emergency-based approval or certain bridge trials that are being conducted by some countries to align with getting COVID drugs as early to market as possible. Cost anywhere between 160 million to $2 billion per drug, and as you can see, only 9 or 10% of drugs make it to the market for approval. So all of this, basically, so much of money being spent, so many years of research being done, and what you see is just 9% of drugs making it to the market for approval. So you can get a sense of the money being spent, the time being spent, and the effort being spent, the amount of people that are required to get a new drug to the market. And it's a very, very resource and cost intense process to get a new drug to the market. So that's what I wanted to highlight. We'll also talk about key stakeholders. On the last slide, I spoke about the number of people or the number of hands that are required. The cost is a big factor, but there's a huge amount of RB, a huge amount of people that are required at the back end of this entire process. And as you can see, I've noted down some names here, or some roles rather, that are key to conduct of a clinical trial. And needless to say, there are regulatory bodies which govern the entire process or ensure that the companies are doing research in the right way. And they are the approving bodies that finally sign off on a release of a drug or a molecule to the market for a specific indication or a disease area. So there's a sponsor, and who's a company like a Novartis, a Merck, or Dr. Reddy's, Wockhardt. So these are pharma companies who are called sponsors, and they are the ones who are responsible for bringing these drugs to the market. And they also do research. Some of them do research, and some of them outsource their research part to some biotechnology companies or to some companies who actually create the molecule in the lab. They do a phase 1 and phase 2 and then sell it off to the sponsors to take it to the regulatory approvals. So there are multiple models that happen in the industry. It's not one type of a model. There are mix and match models, but the sponsor is a company that essentially goes to the regulator and files for a regulatory approval for getting the new drug to the market. And I've given some examples of the sponsor companies. The sponsor companies for doing clinical trials need investigator and sites, or these are the hospitals where clinical trial is conducted. The drugs are tested on the patient, so there's a long process of informed consent, and the SOPs and everything is absolutely in place. There are audits that happen at these investigator sites. And on the other side, there are team members like data managers, stats and programming, statistical analysis and programming team members. There is a medical and scientific writing team. There are labs and third-party data vendors like X-rays and ECG scans and genomic data, CT scans. With COVID, a lot of CT scans are coming back into the picture, and other types of data that are collected by these vendors who specialize in collecting the third-party data. There are regulatory bodies, as I said. US FDA is one of the key regulatory bodies that most of the drug companies file their new drug approvals to. There's MHRA, there is Anvisa from Brazil, and DCGI, as all of us know, is the drug control. DCGI General of India, that's the regulatory body from India. And there's also an ethics committee. There's a 7-member team as per the Indian guidelines released in 2019 that mandates a 7-member team as a part of ethics committee that ensures that the trial is conducted ethically in the interest of subject, in the interest of the public, and as per the governance and as per the rules that are applicable uh, at a country regulation. So there are 7 members, and feel free to look it up on the internet. You'll be able to see who are the members or who are the members required for the ethics committee participation. So unless ethics committee gives an okay, a trial cannot start, and ethics committee plays a very, very key role in giving an okay for conduct of a clinical trial. Yeah, moving on to the next one. The next slide, please. Yeah, this slide we will quickly cover the basic process of conduct of a clinical trial. So as I said, there is a protocol document. This is a document that defines the objective of the study, the primary endpoint and the secondary endpoint, and the analysis method that is going to be used for doing the analysis for any study for its safety and or efficacy. So this document is typically written by the clinicians or the clinical team and the medical writers or the scientific writers. After a protocol has been finalized, there's a site identification. The sites, as I mentioned, are the hospitals or the investigator sites where the clinical trials are conducted. The patients come to these sites and get enrolled at these sites for getting a new medication, and the clinical trials are conducted on the data that gets collected from these patients. There are clinical trial agreements in place with various stakeholders. There is an informed consent process, but also clinical trial agreements on what is the legal aspect of the clinical trial. The insurance aspects of the clinical trials are covered under the clinical trials agreement. As I mentioned, the institutional review board and the ethics committee are the gatekeepers, or they are the toll gates for ensuring that the clinical trial happens as per the regulatory requirements and in the interest of safety of the patients, safety and well-being of the patients rather. There is a distribution chain, or there's a supply chain that is responsible for distribution of samples, distribution of blinded samples, cold storage, and movement of samples from a depot to the investigator site. So there is this huge amount of people, or a chain of a supply chain that helps to distribute the drugs. Post which the patient recruitment happens, where the patient comes to the site, is enrolled into the site depending on the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and he or she gets a randomization number. His data is collected and entered into the electronic data capture systems like Medrio, Oracle, Inform, Rave. There are a lot of them in the industry, and that's a separate topic for discussion, but to name a few. Once the patient data gets selected, the CRA, which is the Clinical Research Associate, starts going to these sites, so investigational sites, to look at what data has been collected. Is it being collected in the right format? Is it being collected in the right manner? Is the drug being stored at the required temperature? Is it stored in the freezer? Is the site following the SOPs? So there are a lot of things that the monitor or the CRA takes care of while he or she goes to the sites for collection of the data, the clinical trial data. The data is then collected and stored in electronic data capture system, or some of the hospitals also use a system called as REDCap, which is a slightly cost-effective model. So that's another data capture tool or system that the sites use. Data review is done. Obviously, the data that gets collected across multiple sites, sometimes there are 10, 15, 20, 200 sites depending on the type of study that's being done. And needless to say, everybody is not going to collect the data in the desired format. So this data needs to be reviewed, this data needs to be cleaned, and this data needs to be certified before it goes for a database log. So all of this is done by the data management team. The data management team looks at the data, tries to identify any kind of anomalies in the data, any kind of trends, any kind of missing values, patterns, missing responses, is all looked at as a part of the data review process. Certain queries are generated. So when you say queries are generated, these are certain questions or clarifications that are sent back to the site, sent back to the investigators, saying that this value doesn't look right, or this value is missing, this response is missing. And one of the classic examples that I could give you is, one page of the clinical trial information says that the subject lost to follow up, and the last page where the patient is supposed to sign off, or the investigator is supposed to sign off, says that the patient died, or patient did not recover. So these two responses are clearly not matching. One of them is saying patient lost to follow up, and the other one is saying that the patient died. So those are the kind of inconsistencies that typically come in the data. Another classic examples that I remember way back in my very early days is because we didn't clean the data properly. And I'm mainly talking about this because this is so important from a data analytics perspective. When we were looking at the data before reporting to the regulators, we realized that there was somebody who was -3 months old into the system. So we were tabulating the data, we were summarizing the data, and typically you will get multiple categories like 18 to say 40 years of age, 40 to 50, 50 to 65, and 65 to 80. So if you categorize age in multiple categories, but we found one patient who was -3 months old, and which is obviously an error. It can't be, but it definitely impacts the overall data analysis of the trial. And when we went back, it was a clear mistake from our side that we had not looked at the data properly. We had not done the data review as a team, and we realized that the investigator or the doctor at the site had entered the date of birth as 3 months back in time. It probably was October of say 2017, and the year had changed, but he or she did not realize. So there was a date difference in the year that he had entered. But these are very small things, but definitely impact the data from an analysis perspective. Coming back to the slide, once the data is all clean, the database is locked. This is again a major milestone in a clinical trial process. And once the database has been locked, it is declared clean for handing over to the stats and the programming team. I mentioned that statistical analysis and programming is a key stakeholder in the clinical trial because they help us design the clinical trial, but they also help us analyze the data that comes out of clinical trials. Once the database is locked, it is sent for further analysis to the statistical analysis team. A trial report is generated. Now, this report is again dependent on therapeutic area, dependent on the objective of the clinical trial, and depending on the primary and secondary endpoints that are defined in the protocol document. There is statistical analysis plan that is already predefined by the statistical lead in the clinical trial, along with the help of the clinician or the medical doctors of who are running this trial. And a trial report is generated, which then goes to the regulatory submission. Now, all these trial reports are typically blinded in the blinded trial. So you'll see 2 arms of a trial or 3 arms of a trial where one is blinded, the other 2 are unblinded, and so on and so forth. But those reports are submitted to the regulators in an unblinded fashion for them to be able to make an assessment or whether a particular drug is safe and effective for a particular indication. So in short, this is the clinical trial process, and there's a huge amount of activity in terms of people, in terms of process or SOPs, and in terms of technology platforms that support each of these activities. So there's a technology platform that specializes or offers protocol creation versus what is the technology that's used for statistical analysis. or for the CRA visits or for the patient recruitment. So a lot of technology is used as an aid for this entire long drawn process. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, here I'd like to highlight the global landscape. So we've already spoken about how large is the clinical trial market. Market size about 44 to 46, I believe. The earlier report said 46 billion as of date, and with the potential to grow to about 68 billion by the year 2028. So we've already spoken about that. The growth rate is really impressive with close to about 6% year-on-year growth. Compounded annual growth rate is close to about 6% or 5.5 to 6%, growing every year. So you can see amount of money, amount of resources being put into the clinical trial space. And as of date, if you see, look at the number of clinical trials that have been registered, way back in say 2000 when they started the clinical trials.gov, the trials were just about 2011 or 2019 trials that were registered in that year when they started it. But as of date, you can see the number. It is a humongous number of clinical trials that have been registered, and there is an overlap. So please bear, they are not individual numbers. There's an overlap between a US registry and EU registry because a lot of companies file for their trials in the EU registry as well as the USA registry. So registry is a place where all the companies are expected to enter their clinical trial data or log in their clinical trial data in terms of what are they doing the trial for, and in the public interest they are expected to publish this information as right to information under the Right to Information Act. And there's also an Indian registry called Clinical Trials Registry of India. You can go and look that up. But here I've just mentioned the EU and the USA registry. And as you can see, potential trivia or a fact of that I thought I should highlight is a large number of these trials in the recent times have been registered for COVID. And it's a very obvious thing. So either a COVID vaccine or whether a drug. A lot of drugs being repurposed for the COVID infection from the earlier, for example, ivermectin, right? Ivermectin was earlier supposed to be given as an anthelmintic, but now it's being tried and tested in COVID. So a lot of drugs being repurposed for COVID. Yeah, moving on to the next slide, please. Some of the data sources, I'll let you read it. And I'll then talk about what are these data sources, from where this data is collected and analyzed, because our topic now moves towards the data analytics, and I wanted to highlight the various data sources that we use for data analytics. So as you can see, there's a wide list of data sources or a wide range of data sources from where the data gets collected in clinical trials. The most obvious is the case report forms or electronic data capture, where the patient data gets captured from these forms or these paper documents. The case report forms can either be paper documents or electronic data capture documents. I've somehow forgotten to add one point here. Apart from this, there are also source documents. These are the hospital records or the hospital files that also bring in a lot of data into the clinical trial data sources. So the source documents, the case report forms, and the EDC constitute the basic foundation of patient data documents or patient data sources. Then there are clinical trial management systems that again captures a lot of data. Then there is IVRS and IWRS, which is more to do with the voice or the randomization data that comes in, and this is more to do with the internet related systems where a patient can just log in or through a phone call, just call up saying that I've got a new randomized patient at my site. I've screened him. and him or her, and I want to now randomize the patient, and this IVRS or interactive IWRS, which is the interactive web reporting system, will give us a unique randomization number for randomizing a patient into the trial. So these systems are again responsible for as a data source into the clinical trials data. Then there are labs, there are ECGs, imaging, as you say, CT scans and other scans. There's genomics data. So this typically gets handled by third party, and there are a lot of companies. One of the key companies which specializes in the labs or the third party or the ECG data is Covance. They are the leading company into this particular area. Now, very recently, they've undergone a name change and become another company, but they are a part of a bigger company now, LabCorp. Then there is an ePro, which is electronic patient reported outcomes, or e-diaries, where patients are given tabs and they enter their own data, whether, have you taken a tablet, what time have you taken a tablet, how many tablets have you taken, are you feeling energetic today, what is your blood pressure value. So there is a list of questionnaires that are actually filled by the patients, and these kind of technology is coming quite into the forefront, because a lot of companies also depend on your Fitbits and your health apps that are on patient's body to collect the data directly from the source and through the diaries or from these sources, and then pushed into the technology platforms like EDC that I mentioned. And last but not the least, there are electronic informed consent forms which are administered to a patient or to a subject, where they give their informed consent for entry into a clinical trial. So as you can see, there is a huge amount of data sources. The data comes from various vendors, different sources, and all of this comes and sits into a particular server. And finally gets analyzed for different reasons and different purposes that we are going to talk about in our next few slides. Yeah. So let's look at clinical trials, some of the challenges and the role of analytics. So as I said, why analytics and why are we doing analytics? One part of analytics is to analyze this data and submit to the regulators to ask them to give an approval for the safety and efficacy and marketing approvals. That's the most obvious objective of analytics. But then there are other challenges that also are faced by the pharma companies and or their partners, which are the CROs, the companies that help pharma companies, the service providers. They also face a lot of challenges, and these challenges are resolved by the help of or by the way of doing data analytics. So some of these challenges are trial and study selection, patient identification and recruitment, design and planning. Clinical trial design and planning also uses a lot of data analytics, patient retention and compliance related management challenges, and data collection and management is the last one that we'll be talking about. And as you can see, roughly 80% of the clinical trials fail to meet patient enrollment timelines, and approximately 1/3 of these phase 3 trials get terminated due to the enrollment difficulties. So as you can see, the largest or the top most reason for failure of clinical trials is the patient enrollment challenge, and we've seen this happening very, very often, especially in 2020, where a lot of sites were not able to enroll patients, and the most obvious reason for the same was COVID, because patients could not come to sites, the investigators or the monitors could not go to their hospitals, and a large number of clinical trials got impacted big time, leading to a lot of delays in the clinical trial process. So imagine the amount of money and the amount of time that got wasted in the last year due to not being able to enroll the patient at a desired or as per the planned schedule, and also a lot of resource that got wasted along with it. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, please. So how do you find the right trial, and what part of data analytics help to find the right trial for the right indication and right type of patient population? So as a layman, or as a layman rather, or as public, most of us are not aware of what are the clinical trials that are happening as a part of the regulatory environment or as a part of the pharma company strategy, and finding a clinical trial matching with the right patient population becomes a big challenge. And how is this done? This is done is to either go the doctors or the physicians that treat the patients are typically aware. The big hospitals are aware of what clinical trials are happening, especially say for example oncology. You know, if you go to a Tata hospital, for example, the doctors and the investigators there definitely know what are the clinical trials happening in the oncology section, in the which geography, which region, which hospitals are doing. So all of that information is available at the hospital or the investigator site. But as a lay person or as public, we are not aware. And then there are 2-3 different sources as a part of the pharma industry that one can look at. One is obviously our Indian registry, which is the Clinical Trials Registry of India, which is on the top section of the slide, right hand side of the slide. And then there is another one that I've pasted here, which is a US FDA website, that the fda.gov, you can go and look it up. That definitely has a good amount of information for the patients to explain about the patient access programs or the entry into the clinical trial. So for example, if one of my family members is suffering from a particular area of, say, a very rare cancer, and all the drugs in the market have been tried and tested, but I still want to go and test for my options. This is another area or another website that I can go and look up and have a meaningful discussion with my treating physician around the treatment options that are available. And as you can see, the reality is less than 5% of cancer patients enroll in a clinical trial, often because the patients and doctors don't know what trials are really available. So there's a huge amount of information that is available on these websites that are posted and that are published by all the governments of those respective countries that are available, and people can go and look them up. There is a option to download them in Excel format. You can play around. Excel is the most easiest tool to analyze data, and all of us have an access to Excel. So, you know, feel free to download this data, play around using, you know, VLOOKUPs and pivot tables or data filters, and you can do basic analysis to see what trials are happening in what region, what country, what year, which company is focusing on what therapeutic areas. These are very basic analytics metrics that you can you know, do it very easily through some of these websites. We'll move on to applicability of patient identification and recruitment. As I mentioned, there is a lot of data available from health and hospital records to explore the fitment of a particular patient or a particular pool of patients and suggest clinical trials. So, for example, if I have to go and look out for patients with comorbidities like chronic kidney failure or chronic liver disease, you know, I should go and look out for data from a hospital that allows me to identify such kind of patients. Patients and data and clinical data points such as symptoms, diagnosis and test results, or the medical history documents that will allow me to look for such kind of data to be able to include those patients into the clinical trials that a company could be planning for or a particular hospital could be planning for. If, for example, if I go and have a discussion with a particular hospital saying that, okay, let's do a particular clinical trial, and how do they know whether certain types of patients are coming to their hospital, is the data available or not? So what the hospital would do is essentially go back and look at their hospital information management systems and look at their notes, pathology reports, diagnosis recommendations, and medical history documents to see whether that hospital is fit for conducting a particular clinical trial information or not. Otherwise, you're actually playing a completely blind game by waiting for the patient, for a particular type of patient to come in, and that's going to take very long time to conduct that clinical trial, which nobody does now. So everybody is dependent largely on the technology, largely on the data, largely on the metrics that the hospitals generate for a particular indication, a particular disease area, a particular type of readiness for that hospital, and also the government approvals for that hospitals are required before they go ahead and start doing the clinical trial. So with respect to the patient identification, I just wanted to highlight one particular case study. This hospital belongs to US. So there is this Heart Institute which used analytics and proved that reduction in the total time of patient identification. They wanted to look for two specific type of patients for completing their entire patient population, and they were unable to do it, or they had very large number of patient records. So what they did is they started looking at patient records, but then they realized that this is going to take humongous amount of time because the hospital had a large amount of patient pool, a large amount of hospital documents to look at, and then they looked at using artificial intelligence and data analytics to look at their patient data files, and they could actually identify 16 patients within 2 hours by using data analytics tool, which ideally would have taken them 6 long months to identify these just 2 patients that they wanted to complete the trial. So look at the merit, or look at the advantages of doing data analytics by using technology platforms and technology as a supporting tool. So people are really not doing anything manually. Those are very long time back things, but this is the kind of advantage, or this is the kind of merit that the technology offers in doing data analytics. It also patient retention and compliance is another area where analytics plays a big role, or supports big time. So as I had mentioned earlier, 80% of clinical trials fail to meet the enrollment timelines and enrollment targets, and because of this, a lot of clinical trials that take a long time or are terminated midway because they are not able to enroll right type of patients. And then the companies don't want to spend extra amount of money on trying to find the patient. So what comes to the rescue is the applicability of AI and analytics, and I'm actually making a mention of AI here. That's a separate topic for discussion. I'm not going to talk about AI, but AI is definitely one of the key things that definitely helps to mine the data before the data is analyzed. So artificial intelligence, AI means artificial intelligence for those of you who don't know, basically helps to search both historical and incoming data throughout the trial to predict the dropout patterns, probability of who are the people who are likely to drop out first, and what could be the reasons for protocol violations. So if you see, there are certain villages from where patients drop out, and why are they dropping out? Because they have a lockdown, because the commute is not very patient friendly, or because there is a thought process that clinical trials don't do good, and we should not go for the modern medicine. So there is a lot of reasons. And how do you find this out? Basically, looking at the data. If you look at the patient data pool, you realize that certain geographies and certain set of population fall under category who do not want to be a part of clinical trials, or whose patient compliance is very poor. So that helps you to identify the reasons for compliance related inconsistency, or compliance related inadherence. There are certain companies who are also now going to the next step by giving patients ingestible sensors to track the drug intake. So, for example, what they do is the patient takes a tablet, the sensor inside the body senses it and sends direct electronic signals to the servers at the pharma company site or on the technology that they're using to track the compliance of the patient data. So that's another way of tracking compliance and analyzing the data after that. And then another last example that I personally found very interesting is some companies are now using camera methods to look at the facial expression of patients and seeing whether the patient has taken the tablet or swallowed the tablet or not. And once they get that camera picture, they tick in the database saying that, okay, the patient has taken the tablet, and the system at the back end sitting somewhere in the US or somewhere in Switzerland actually tracks your data for a patient ingesting a tablet sitting here in Mumbai. So those are very, very interesting things that are happening. So the data is being collected through a lot of different means, and what it helps is to analyze this data and go to the regulators faster so that the clinical trials can happen seamlessly and get drugs faster to the market. One of the other challenges that we spoke about is the design and planning of the clinical trials. That's another challenge area. And I'd like to highlight one of our own country example here. So if you look at this particular picture here, this is an article that was published in the Lancet fairly recently. I think it's February 2020. Yeah. And this talks about the prevalence of depressive disorders and anxiety disorders. So first, let's look at the depressive disorders, and as you can see, this is a heat map or heat chart that clearly depicts certain regions in India where the prevalence of depressive disorders is very high, and prevalence that is low respect to the certain states that depict the prevalence of say depressive disorders and anxiety disorders. So the numbers are pretty self-explanatory. There are certain states like Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Odisha, which show high prevalence in terms of depressive disorders, and Kerala and the eastern parts showing, and also some parts of Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh showing quite a high prevalence in the area of anxiety disorders. So you can look it up for yourself. In fact, on the first one, I missed looking at that. Maharashtra and Karnataka are also on the higher side when it comes to depressive disorders, followed by other states like Assam and West Bengal. So this clearly indicates a fact that these are the areas that the pharma companies need to concentrate on in terms of planning their clinical trials, or in terms of even the marketing part of it. I'm actually going or extending it to beyond clinical trials. But for example, if a pharma company wants to market a particular drug, their marketing strategy should be based on the data that comes from these kind of heat charts that help you market drugs in the right region with the right strategy, with the right messaging, saying that these are the areas where there's a high prevalence. These are the regions where the clinical trials and hospitals should be targeted for planning of the clinical trials, and these are the regions where the patient data is going to come, rather than going and concentrating on the regions that will not give good amount of data or large population of data. So if you can go to the next slide. This is another example. Yeah, you can just go and click and complete the overall slide. Yeah. So this is another US-centric example that I'd like to highlight, which helps us to focus on where is the best place to start the study in terms of clinical trial design and planning. If you look at this particular region, it's very important to know the disease prevalence or the prevalence of a particular condition before a clinical trial is initiated or before a clinical trial is planned. And how is that done? You look at the ongoing recruitment in a particular region. So if you look at those red dots where you see the disease prevalence pretty much is everywhere. You can see a lot of green everywhere. But if you can see, there are only red dots for an ongoing recruitment, and then there are those blue or purple colored dots that show the completed study. But the rest of the regions are pretty much, free for planning of the clinical trial for a particular disease. It also helps us to identify sites with less competition and identify sites which are available for recruitment because there is a disease prevalence in those particular states or those particular regions. And then you do a deep dive to see what are the what are the hospitals in a particular state. I mean, we are talking of the US geography here, but what are the hospitals, which are the states, which are the specialty, who are the investigators who are specializing in those regions and those areas. So analytics basically will help you mine this data from various data sources. Now, I'm not getting into data sources. As I said, this is a completely different topic for discussion, but there is a lot of publicly available data. There are a lot of companies that sell this data. What the data analyst or the data analysis lead needs to do is look at this entire data, bring it together on a platform in a standardized format, and then draw out these meaningful data outputs or data messages that help us decide and define what is the strategy for planning of a clinical trial. Also, sometimes there's a seasonality. For example, dengue fever. There's no point in analyzing or there's no point in planning a dengue fever study in a season where it's just not I mean, whether it does not, people are not getting infected by dengue fever. So, if I understand correctly, we are doing one clinical trial rather two clinical trials in dengue fever, and typically the seasonality is somewhere between September and March. But there's no point in planning the clinical trial in dengue fever, sometime after say April or May, because you will not see a lot of patients coming, and there's a lot of historical data to support that evidence. So we looked out on certain things and tried to find out what are the best hospitals, who are the doctors, which are the regions. And based on that, we then planned all our back-end activities in terms of going to the ethics committee, finding out the investigators, finding out the sites, the data management team. So all of this planning was done in alignment of the season of the dengue fever. So the point here is whatever analysis that we do helps us plan and plan better and save cost, of course, and do things more effectively and submit the data to the regulators on time. Okay, so the key messages, as I said, what are the hotspots for disease prevalence? We already spoke about it. Which are the key hospitals recruiting patients? How many patients have been reported in a particular state? Does it make sense to go to Texas as compared to some other states, so on and so forth? Where is the best place to start a study? Can we fast track a particular site because that site already has investigators who have an experience in doing a particular type of study? So, for example, COVID. A lot of hospitals now are doing COVID trials for multiple sponsors, and then there's a fight for patients. I mean, needless to say. So should I go to a hospital that is a fast recruiting hospital because there are so many COVID patients, but every sponsor is fighting for those COVID patients? Or should I go to a region where there is COVID happening, not so high, but the number of patients will be exclusively my own patients, so that I get most of the patients for my study and I'm able to submit the data to the regulators in a faster manner? So those are the decisions that help sponsors, and analytics helps us drive it. And these are only some of the examples. Trust me, I have touched the top of the iceberg, but analytics can happen in every region of the clinical trials. You can also go to supply chain and do analytics of which site is consuming more number of samples, which site has more number of expired samples. Can I look at a faster recruiting site and pass on from my samples to that site, because I'm the site who's a low recruiting site, and I'm about to expire my samples after 4 months. So can I give it to another site who's recruiting faster? So analytics can help in any and every field of clinical trials. And as I said, these are only a few examples that I could bring on today, because I know we are cognizant of the time. I can't go on forever, but I'm happy to do some session at some other point if anybody is interested, and talk about the other areas where we could apply analytics. So next slide, please. So as I said, what is measured? Data can be measured for a single trial. Data can be measured for multiple trials, across multiple trials in a specific or in a particular therapeutic area. And data can also be analyzed, which is now called as the meta-analysis, across multiple trials. Now, all of us have heard about the vaccine trials that UK is doing for COVID, where they are trying to cross compare a lot of COVID vaccine trials. So these are meta-analysis, data coming in from multiple trials, a lot of historical trials, also a lot of synthetic arms being included in those trials. And these are meta-analysis where a huge amount of data comes in from various sources, from various trials being done for COVID, and there is very complex statistical models being applied to see the safety and efficacy of treatment options in COVID. So those are the meta-analysis trials that are a good example of analysis in the recent times. The analytics, as I said, can also be applied to productivity. It's not only about clinical trials planning and design and conduct of clinical trials, but also to measure productivity of the people who are working on the clinical trials. And I'll give an example on productivity with respect to the site-related productivity, in terms of how many patients does a particular site recruit, or how many transactions does or how many trips is a CRA doing, what are the monitoring productivity for a particular CRA. Those are the kind of metrics which are operational metrics, can also be tracked using analytics. What's the quality of a particular site one against the other? What is the quality of the data coming in from? What are the inconsistencies? What are the errors that happen at a particular investigator? We've seen certain investigators putting in a lot of repetitive data, and these are typically investigators that are, I wouldn't say ethical in that sense, but there has been data coming in from a lot of sites which has a lot of repeatability. So you'll see a lot of data being repeated, and by the use of analytics, we can see patterns. You can see very clear trends to see same kind of data being entered for different patients in a clinical trial. And that's where the sponsors can analyze, because these are red flags that allow the sponsors to say, hey, there's something wrong happening here. How can the blood pressure be 120 by 70 or 120 by 80 for all the 100 patients in a clinical trial coming from this particular center, or from this particular trial. So this is a very simple example that I'm giving, but there are very, very solid examples that very clearly stand out if you look at certain charts and certain maps, or certain statistical outputs from data analytics. And it also helps us to track the cost and the spend, which is the amount of dollars spent, because as we've seen, this is a very, very cost intensive process, and the pharma companies are sitting with a big lens on the amount of spending, and they're looking at reducing the spend to get the drugs to the market. So going on to the next slide. We'll talk of how it is done. We saw what is being analyzed, and I gave you some of the examples around what is being analyzed. But we'll also talk about how is this done? And typically, I'm not going to talk of Excel because Excel is a very basic and very primitive method of data analysis. And I'm not saying it's bad. I love Excel. I'm a big fan of Excel. But one needs to move on from Excel because the regulatory authorities, when we submit the clinical trials data to the regulatory authorities, they do not accept any platform or any tool that is not validated, and Excel is not a validated environment. Anybody can go and make changes to an entry or to a patient data that has been entered into Excel. Whereas some of the other tools like the EDC platforms that I spoke about is like an Oracle Clinical or a Medrio, or even we as a company, we have the company that I work for, Cliantha Research. We have our own platform called Code Angelo, where we are doing global clinical trials for about 50 plus studies as of date. So these are validated platforms that have a very strong audit trail that define who made the change, what change was made, at what time point was it made, and what value was changed from what to what. So for example, if I change a value from 120 for a systolic blood pressure, I would want to know who made that change. So if I make a change from 120 to say 140, I want to definitely know as a regulator who made the change from 120 to 140 and why was that change made. And a very strong audit trail needs to be maintained because we are into a very serious and serious business of clinical trials, and this is something that every regulator is looking at very closely. So coming back to the methods, there are various softwares that are available in the market. I'll name a few of them. The first one, as you can see, it is spelled as SAS, which stands for Statistical Analysis Systems, but it's actually called as SAS. You can call it SAS or SAS, but it is ideally meant to be SAS platform. A lot of us also call it SAS. That's the most recognized tool for the regulators because the US FDA uses SAS. All the US FDA programs from their programmers are based on SAS. So SAS is a very popular platform that's being used. It's a programming language that all of the pharmas and all the service providers or the CROs like us use. An upcoming tool or an upcoming analytics tool is Python. A lot of AI/ML related analytics is done using Python. Python also helps to mine or extract the data in a particular format, and the natural language processing, the NLP, a part of the data analytics or mining is also a big part of Python programming. There is a freeware called as R, and you can look it up again on internet. Again, R is a very upcoming tool with respect to data analytics and very comparable to SAS, but people are still not very confident of using R as a reporting language to US FDA or MHRA because they've been using SAS for say more than 20 plus years, and there's a mindset of using SAS, but R is definitely an upcoming language and a very comparable tools and charts with SAS. So that's very interesting stuff that a lot of programmers that are now getting into there for data analytics purposes. Some of the data visualization tools, which give a very attractive looking visualizations in terms of pictures and in terms of charts, are the Tableau chart. Tableau is another software that is a very well-renowned software that's being used by the large or pharma companies for data visualization, and Power BI is another tool by Microsoft that also allows good amount of data to be extracted from various sources and reported out as very good looking and very pictorial outputs for data visualization. So these are some of the examples, some of the names that I thought I should bring up because technology is a very important part of data analytics activity. Yeah, moving on to the next one. These are a few examples. Some of the visual dashboards. Obviously, I'm sure you can't read most of it. Not even I can't read most of it unless I really go close. but just the names for you to understand. Some visual dashboards, as you can see on the leftmost corner of the screen, that gives you, a lot of visual representation on certain parameters, on certain comparative dashboards in one single slide. So tools like Tableau or tools like business objects that I mentioned on the earlier slide allow you to do visual dashboarding. Bar charts again is a very very user friendly way to compare 2 or 3 different parameters in any kind of trial. I'm sure everybody uses bar chart. It doesn't need an explanation. There's a scatter plot where a lot of outliers, a lot of exception values are highlighted. Then there are whisker plots, there are box plots, which are not mentioned here, but those are some of the examples that you can look up. And then there's also something called as a timeline chart, where we compare a behavior of a particular parameter over a period of time in terms of how certain values change from a baseline to end of the treatment, or how certain set of patients or certain patient profiles change from a period of time over, say, 6 months or 1 year duration. And this gives a very clear idea of where most of the patients fall and what are the exception areas and what are the exception patients behaviors that a clinician is able to identify using the timeline chart. Yeah, so I think that's all I had for today's discussion. And I just hope that this helped. And I'm happy to answer any questions or any points, any comments that anyone has. I'll be happy to brainstorm. I'll be happy to take back what I don't know. And as I said in the initial part of my introduction, I am still learning. It's quite possible that I don't know a lot of it, but I'm absolutely happy to come back as a follow-up and help you with any information that I can I can go back and help with. Yeah. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to interact with all of you. I'm sorry I can't see everyone, but I can still definitely see about 150 plus, and I'm humbled by or honored to be talking to all of you here and share whatever I've learned so far. And will definitely continue to share going forward as a part of the pharma industry. It's been a pleasure to work in this field and contribute to drug development, clinical research, and and me and my team continue to do that with a feeling of sense and pride, because as I speak today to you, there are 3 COVID trials that we are working on, and it definitely gives a very good feeling that we are able to give back to the humanity or to the mankind about the kind of things that we've learned, and being able to give an opportunity over last so many years from the industry background and knowledge to my peers and through my seniors and through my industry friends. I think I must thank everyone for where I am today. So thank you once again. I hope this was useful, and that's where I'd like to end for today. Thank you.
I request Professor Krishna Iyer to be there as a chairperson for the question answer session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me see. The orientation. Let me go to the chat box. And there are several questions here. And as usual, what I'm going to do is go from the last question upwards, because it's easy to scroll them and don't miss anything. So, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Yeah.
So, one of the questions is, Madam, exactly how many years does it take for a new drug development process?
So as you saw on the earlier slide, it's actually mentioned therein. Somewhere between 12 to 15 years is a standard timeline. But as I said, as I also said, with the current situation and circumstances, the drug development process has reduced to, or rather the drug approval process has reduced. The regulators are giving very early approvals, very fast track approvals on a fast track basis, expedited approvals as they say. So you can see a lot of vaccines or repurposed drugs being approved in the market for as early as within 6 to 8 months or even 3 to 6 months in cases of vaccines. But to your question, it takes about 12 to 15 years from the time, and that's an average number. So some of them could take a shorter time, but the average number is somewhere between 12 to years from the start of a phase 1 trial to getting the drug approval from the regulators. I hope this helps.
Thank you. And I think in a sense you also answered the second question asked, which was why in case of COVID vaccines, it comes to the market much faster than the conventional time. I think you just answered both in one shot. So let me just go back.
Just one liner that I'd like to add here, or maybe a couple of lines, is why in cases of COVID vaccine, as all of us know, I mean, COVID is too large for us to battle right now, and these, as you must be aware that these are exception or expedited approvals. These are not the normal times. And under the normal circumstances, they would have taken time. But right now, this is a time of managing a risk versus a benefit, and the regulators are taking an approach of the benefit versus the risk involved in favor of the benefit rather than in favor of the risk, which a standard process does not allow. So this is more of an exception rather than a norm, and hence they are giving faster approvals. And we can't afford to not to vaccinate people, so they are going ahead with it. But at the same time, they are analyzing, they are tracking the data in the real world. A lot of data being, especially with respect to the side effects or pediatric usage, or the lactating or the pregnant women is being really tracked very closely to come out with any new recommendations on vaccines in these situations. So while they have given those approvals, the data is being tracked, and the recommendations are changing pretty much on a ongoing basis. So earlier, the lactating women were, there was a question around whether the vaccine should be given to the lactating women or not. But then the data that they collected has proven a good amount of safety in lactating women, and now they have released recommendation on COVID vaccines being fairly safe. I don't know the numbers exactly in terms of the percentage wise safety, but fairly safe in use for lactating women. So that is something that's an upcoming data that gets tracked.
Another question is, initially when Covaxin and Covishield were introduced, the gap between the vaccination doses was much less than what is recommended nowadays. On what basis has this been announced?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question, so I'd like to pass it. But there are several studies. Again, this is a recommendation that has come from the government and an expert panel that belongs to a set of doctors and who've been there in the industry. So these are experts, these are doctors. They are the qualified people to answer this. But from what I understand is that it is because they have now looked at a lot of data that's coming in to justify that the difference between the first two doses can be increased to, earlier it was say 4 weeks, then it became 8 weeks, and now in 12 weeks, and now it's actually gone to, say, somebody is saying 6 months to 9 months as well. So a lot of data is being looked at, and these are the recommendations coming from the various government bodies. I know that there is also a lot of speculation on relating this to the vaccine stocks, but I'm not the right person to talk about it, and I don't have the data to talk about it. So let's go with the recommendations that have come from the government and the expert panel that drives these kind of decisions.
As an extension of that question, the question is, I would like to know who will be responsible and give money if adverse effect happens to patient volunteer in the current scenario.
Typically, under the regular clinical trial circumstances, there is an insurance. The patients do get covered, the volunteers do get covered under the insurance, which is a part of the clinical trials agreement. So that amount and that process is clearly defined. In cases of COVID trials, there's a lot of back and forth happening, and this indemnity clause that people are talking about, and again that's mainly in cases of vaccine, and in cases of expedited approvals, there's a lot of debate going on. But as a part of the standard clinical process, it is a sponsor responsibility, and that amount is clearly laid out in the clinical trial agreements under the insurance section.
Thank you very, very much for your views and answers to all the queries that were there. I think I picked all the chat questions and nothing is left. I have one more question.
Sure.
As we have a talk about virtual clinical trials. Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on another feasibility in the Indian context?
Virtual clinical trials are clinical trials where the patients don't necessarily come to the site. So all of these are, as the word itself suggests, these are virtual in nature. They are clinical trials where the patients sit at their home location or their respective homes or respective geographies, and all the data or the clinical trial typically happens through electronic medium. So for example, all my vital signs, or if I'm a patient, my vital signs, my drug compliance, everything is being collected by electronic medium like my cell phone or my Fitbit or any other devices that I enter into my electronic diary or into my iPad or a Samsung tablet. So typically the patient does not have to go to the site, but there are very few instances where the site staff, the nurses and the doctors may come to the patient home for some kind of an assessment or for an kind of a visit, but there are very few. So for example, if you have a trial for say going on for a year or so, you might just see 3 or 4 times where the hospital staff and or the doctors would visit the patient, or the patient has to visit the hospital. But most of the clinical trial conduct happens through their homes. All the data is collected electronically, directly transferred to the servers at a single location. At specific time points, the lab data, somebody from the lab will come and collect the data from my home. If, for example, if I'm a patient, I'm an old patient, and I'm not able to go out of the house, somebody will come and collect my sample, take the sample, directly transfer that data for my sample into the lab database. The lab database will directly send it to the sponsor. So there's a virtual trial happening. The patient is not going to the site. Nobody is going anywhere except for very very exceptional or very less number of visits where somebody is making a visit to the hospital or to a center or to a laboratory. Few large companies, I know Johnson and Johnson is very big on remote or virtual trials. In India, while people are talking about it, the connectivity and the patient education programs still need to be a bit more robust for driving clinical trials, because as you know, our clinical trials are also conducted in India in very remote parts of India or the second tier cities where patients are not extremely tech savvy in terms of how to use a particular tablet. While it does happen in regional languages, but the compliance in terms of entering the data or the internet connectivity is not so robust yet for collecting the data from from the electronic medium. So it's an upcoming field. People are trying, and it is definitely very promising. It helps down cut the cost to a very large extent, and the quality of data, if done in a proper manner, is also very clean, because the patient directly enters the data or sometimes doesn't even enter the data. It just directly goes from a patient's body into the systems and gets tracked. You cut the time, you cut the cost, and the quality of these trials is also far more better in terms of what gets collected at the site and entered into source documents and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. I think that is it for almost all the questions. I hope I've not missed any questions. And it's been a pleasure to be the chair of the session. And again, I thank you very much on behalf of our college and all the attendees. I'll hand over the mic to Vaishali ma'am to take it further.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyer. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Indrani. It's always been a pleasure to listen to you. I still remember your association when you used to visit Bombay College of Pharmacy when the Academy for Clinical Excellence was being established. So, of course, your contribution even of ACE has been commendable, and there are few of the comments, not few, I would say many, but I'm just mentioning few over here, that it was an excellent presentation. That is what all the participants have said. Excellent session, then imperious and knowledgeable session. So these are the comments that we have received. So so thank you so much. And as a token of appreciation and, as a remembrance of your contribution for this FDP, on behalf of Bombay College of Pharmacy, our students and our housekeeping people, they have planted a sapling on behalf of you. So I would like to play the video for the same. Over to you, team.
Oh, that is very exciting. I love this idea. Thank you so much.
Cannot hear the sound.
No, I can't hear the sound.
Yeah, we can't hear the sound. Please play the video again.
I think there is a technical issue, but I
No.
saw.
I think they will. Yeah, no, they will play. Just a second. Just give us some time. We do have time.
But
So I
I
request.
must say it's a very different and a very beautiful gesture. I am so touched by looking at this because I'm personally a big fan of nature, very very close to trees and plants. So this is one of the best gifts I think that I would have got as a part of any presentation that I've made so far. This is really nice. Thank you so much, Vaishali.
Thanks, Indrani. Our pleasure always. Yes, the team. Can you play?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Indrani, for being a part of this. It's been a pleasure listening to you. Thank you once again for accepting my
I share
invitation.
the feeling. The feeling is mutual. It's been a pleasure, and thank you, Vaishali, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay.
Over to you, Dr. Dipti.
Vaishali ma'am,
Yes.
should I also pass on her well wishes of Vinita and Vivek Khanvilkar to her?
Yes.
I will let them know.
Yeah. I
Especially,
don't know whether she remembers. आपल्याला कदाचित 2-3 वर्ष सिनियर असतील. So
Okay.
I don't know.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but nevertheless, yes, absolutely. I mean, I may not remember, but yes, it's nice.
Yes.
Hello, and